Wagner, você vai começar, certo?
Think the good time is here. The Dr. Hill and Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Glauco the ADAPT is very happy for your supporting is very important for the ADAPT, and the ADAPT is very happy for your meeting. And other doctors is very important in ADAPT like for your cheers. And I think Laís is speaking a little more about the very important about the meetings for the ADAPT, please.
Boa noite, Dr. Jonathan. Acho que agora podemos começar.
Excelente. Eu vou começar em português, depois teremos a apresentação aqui em inglês, mas quero dar as boas-vindas aqui a todos para o nosso webinar apoiado aqui pela ADAPT, de novidades em biometria. E nós vamos ter aqui o Dr. Warren Hill, que não necessita de apresentação, mas eu vou falar um pouquinho aqui sobre ele, porque ele tem sido extremamente importante aqui para todos nós oftalmologistas, com dedicação aqui à catarata refrativa. Ele trabalha, tem praticado na Arizona pelos últimos 38 anos, né? Devotado aqui a carreira dele para cirurgias desafiadoras aqui do segmento anterior, mas ainda mais a matemática e cálculos de lentes intraoculares. Então, eu falo que não necessita apresentação, porque desde a minha formação, a gente tem visitado aqui os sites, os diversos sites do Dr. Hill, como recurso e referência para cálculo das lentes intraoculares em diversas formas e sabores aqui dentro da oftalmologia, né? Então, tanto recebendo quanto enviando aqui dados. Então, nós convivemos com inúmeras apresentações e publicações em encontros nacionais e internacionais em praticamente todo o mundo, né? Mas, para mim, pessoalmente, e para todos nós, o grande impacto mesmo veio numa apresentação inesquecível na minha parte favorita aqui do Congresso Americano de Cirurgia Refrativa e Catarata, que é o Innovators Lecture. E tem o termo de mind-blowing, né? Que é a apresentação de uma fórmula utilizando inteligência artificial. E é incrível, olhando que isso já faz quase 10 anos. Estamos em 2023 e essa apresentação foi em 2014. Mas ainda nesse contexto aqui de inteligência artificial no mundo, né? Com inacreditável impacto que o GPT e as fórmulas de linguagem têm trazido a todo mundo, né? Saber da dedicação e da inovação do Dr. Hill nessa área é realmente incrível. Junto, e logo após, teremos a apresentação aqui do Glauco, que tem virado um grande amigo, é professor associado aqui da Universidade Federal do Paraná, mestre e doutor aqui pela Faculdade Evangélica, pós-graduado em cirurgia refrativa pela Cleveland Clinic, e de lá trouxe casos incríveis aqui. A gente tem discutido muito sobre novas condutas e abordagens no melhor tratamento para nossos pacientes com catarata e disfunção aqui do cristalino. Então, quero dar as boas-vindas aqui ao Dr. Warren Hill, Dr. Glauco, e whenever you're ready, we can start this next incredible presentation.
Okay, should I go first, or should Dr. Glauco go first, or how would you like to do that?
Dr. Hill, you can start.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen. That's okay. Give me just a moment here to get everything set up. And here we go. Okay, is that showing up just exactly correct, Les?
It's perfect.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So Jonathan, as Jonathan's a dear friend, and thank you very much for the kind words. We're going to talk about the iStar, which is really something new and something better. You know, in the world we live in today, there's always a new biometer that everybody talks about. This is new in a way that's very, very exciting. So what Hugstrite has done is they've completely reimagined biometry. And they understand that we don't want to have a room full of different equipment. So what this device has done is all the equipment you need as an anterior segment surgeon is actually in a single device. And there are no compromises. So this kind of replaces almost a room full of equipment, 3 different devices. And as I said, there's no compromises. All of the different things that this device does are probably best in class. You won't find a better biometer, you won't find a better topographer. The anterior segment OCT is magnificent. So again, there are no compromises. And so we have better decision making, of course, we have better outcomes. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that everything is automated. So in all of our offices, we have 28 employees. In our office, the person with the least experience and the person with the most experience can get the same outcomes because everything is automated. So we have, it has a touch screen, there's user guidance if it's needed, and there's very short acquisition time. It takes 40 seconds for both eyes. So we're not spending a lot of time having people waiting and being put through the process. So all the images are high quality, exactly what you would expect from Hogstrite. There's a wide range of things that it's done. It's very quick and it's very high resolution. So basically we can visualize the anterior segment with OCT. We can measure the entire eye. We can do corneal topography, not only of the front surface of the cornea, but real topography of the back surface of the cornea. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. And that's especially important for ectatic diseases like keratoconus and pellucid marginal degeneration. And then, of course, we calculate IOL power. So we have a lot of information that's all at our fingertips and exactly what we as anterior segment surgeons need. The format is exactly what you're used to with all the other instruments. So the biometry looks like the best biometry you've ever seen. The A-scan representation is like an immersion A-scan. And then we have multiple meridian scanning. The topography is, as I mentioned, looks just like the best topographer you've ever seen. So if this is not a biometer trying to be a topographer, it's the best biometer you've ever seen. And again, we measure the anterior and the posterior cornea, and it also does pachymetry. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Zernike analysis. This is the part where most people kind of want to run away and leave the room the moment you mention Zernike. But doing a Zernike representation is keys to the kingdom. It's a way to show the patient, combined with image simulation, exactly how they're going to see after surgery. And the image simulations are very, very close to what the patient's going to see. And then we have keratometry that's familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. It still is the 32 measurements you're used to, but it borrows some other technology that makes them even more accurate. So we're going to start off with how we scan the anterior segment. And most of the time we're used to radial scans. And with OCT, you do a radial scan. Take a look at this. This is how the anterior segment, or actually the eye, is scanned. So it's very, very high resolution Mandela scanning. So it's one step above what we're used to with radial scans. Now, when we have this much image density, we can do things like motion compensation. We can put images on top of each other and get very, very high resolution pictures. So we scan, we can segment, we can compensate for motion, and then we can generate the different images and different information that you need. And we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail. So motion compensation is one of the best things. Of course, people's eyes are always having these little saccades moving back and forth, and we can make that go away. So we can be very, 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 very high resolution image. So this is what an uncompensated image looks like, and then with image compensation, we get this higher resolution. And the same with when we look at the front part of the eye, we can scan the whole anterior segment and then put it together in terms of segments, and then do a three-dimensional cloud, which is very nice. So this is just kind of a quick example of how all of this works. We're generating multiple images, which we can put on top of each other. Now, the swept source OCT portion of this is used for biometry. And depending on how big the pupil is, we can, see a lot about the anterior segment. So we get the axial length, the anterior chamber depth, central corneal thickness, the keratometry, the lens thickness, vitreous, retina, all the usual stuff. And it's set up looking just like an immersion A scan. And you can also place the gates wherever you need to. So if the machine has some difficulty determining exactly where the posterior capsule is, you can go ahead and manually place that. And if you think about it, the posterior capsule is what? It's 5 microns thick, and a red blood cell is 7 microns. This device can find that without any difficulty at all. So let's begin with dense cataracts. I know in Brazil you see quite a few, and same where I live in Arizona, we have a lot. So we'll start with a 38-year-old lady who was sent to us by the retina specialist, and she has early diabetic eye disease and has a dense nuclear and posterior subcapsular cataract. Her vision is hand movements. Okay, we're not talking about early cataract here. Okay, hand movements vision. Here's the IOLMaster, like versions 500 and earlier, nothing. Okay, and with the LensStar, you can see that we have this straight line right here, and this is the image with the LensStar. It's in a dense cataract mode, but you can see that it says result evaluated using a composite algorithm. It's not, the cataract is so dense that it's really hard to find the exact peak for the retinal pigment epithelium. Okay, here's the right eye and the left eye, and you can see the very dense PSC plaque that she has right here. And the iStar is still able to pick up the RPE spike. Now, this is something I want to share with you. You can see that we have these little check marks. And, those of you who've heard me speak before know I'm very keen on validation criteria. And we always say a measurement is only as good as our ability to know what it means. So what we did was we put all the validation criteria for this instrument in the software. So when you see the little check mark, it means that the validation criteria has been met. And if not, then we just repeat the measurement. So you don't have to worry about, are the Ks okay, are they not? No, the validation criteria have already been run on the keratometry by the instrument itself. And when you see the check mark, it means you can use the device. So 22.07 is the axial length we got. And then here's the A scan, 22.07. This is an immersion A scan that I did this myself on the patient, and she turned out just fine. So, wow, what can you say? How many biometers can do hand movements cataract? Well, let's talk about the reflective keratometry. Now, those of you who've used the LensStar love the keratometry. For things like the toric IOL, it's just the best. It's the best in the business. Now, the machine has telecentric optics, which means that the patient doesn't have to be one exact distance from the device. They can be a little closer, a little farther away, and the measurements are still valid. And the keratometry was optimized against the existing algorithms for the LensStar. So nothing needs to be changed in terms of your lens constant. You'll get the same Ks with the iStar that you did with the LensStar. So we have 32 measurement points, and this is basically what it looks like. But instead of each of the measurement points being in the same meridian, now they're offset just a little bit. So we get a little bit more information about both the power and the meridian. It's still 1.65 millimeters and 2.3 millimeters, but the Ks are very, very robust and very stable. And there's some new features. We have some resolution based on infrared and color reflected images. And only a single measurement is required to get all this data. So here's what they look like. And this may look like some of the other devices you've seen. So we're putting additional information back into the device to allow us to do this with even higher accuracy. And then this is just a quick showing of some of the testing we did, where we have the validation criteria running in the background, where every aspect of the case are actually tested. And again, when you see the little check marks, it means they've met validation criteria. So it's kind of like having me inside the box saying, okay, those Ks are okay for you. Now, here's another example of how the reflective keratometry works. And then we're going to add something else on top. We're going to add topography. So here's IOMaster 500 and earlier version. You notice there's no keratometry whatsoever. This is somebody that had radial keratotomy. And some of these corneas with radial keratotomy, aside from being very flat, they're also very irregular. So we did it with the LenStar. We thought, okay, we'll get it with the LenStar. Nothing. Okay. So this person has 11 diopters of astigmatism and just a very distorted cornea. So absolutely nothing. So here we are with the iStar. Okay, we begin. Gives us a topographic map. Okay, that's pretty nice. We have usable keratometry. We have validated numbers that meet the validation criteria. And we get some diagnostic stuff that tells us the cool-strand ratio is elevated, which is what you see with radial keratotomy. And it has an unstable tear film. So, wow. I mean, talk about just a wealth of information. And this person has 11.49 diopters of astigmatism. So, you know, a very, very abnormal, very distorted cornea. And they did fine. I mean, of course, the aberration profile is going to be terrible, but they did fine. So let's talk about some of the topographic maps that this will generate. These are all the maps from the same eye of the same patient. And these are each of the different maps it generates, just say like on the Atlas topographer. So the axial curvature map is what we're most familiar with. It displays, you know, an average of scaled values with some smoothing. This is the one that we like a lot because it relates corneal shape to corneal power. And we often use it to characterize what the cornea is like for a toric IOL. You know, is the astigmatism regular? Is it symmetrical? Is this patient a toric candidate? And a topographic axial curvature map is mostly accurate towards the center of the cornea. This is a tangential curvature map, which you may have seen. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit more accurate towards the center of the cornea. It uses smaller patterns. But let's say someone has keratoconus. This may be a little bit better for delimiting the areas of the cone, and there's less data smoothing. But most of the time we use the axial curvature map and not tangential. And then we also have, for those of you that do contact lens fitting, you know, a best fit sphere map where we fit the corneal surface to a best fit sphere, and it shows those areas that are above the best fit sphere and those areas that are below. And you can do the same thing. Well, this is basically how that works. So we have our best fit sphere, the areas above and below. And you can do the same thing with the toric map as well. These are normal parts of any topographer, where instead of using a best fit sphere, we use a best fit toric. And then those areas that are above show as orange and red, and those areas that are below show as blue and green. So it acts just like a topographer. Now, what I like about this is the toric IOL. About 40% of our patients receive toric IOLs. So we have this amazing topography that you can bring up the image and look and see how it is dynamically. It gives you world-class keratometry. And then also we have a nice topographic map. And the questions we ask are, is this patient a candidate? Is the astigmatism regular? Is it symmetrical? Are the Ks okay? What is the orientation of the steep meridian? And you know, does it meet validation criteria? And what are the power difference between meridians? So pretty much everything you need to know about a toric IOL is there with just, you know, one button push. And one of the things I like for those of you that, you know, may not have like a Callisto system or the LenSar, if you click on this little button right here, it'll give you a white image of the eye, which shows the toric IOL orientation. It shows the steep meridian. It shows the flat meridian. It gives you that 180-degree reference meridian, and you can look at the blood vessels during surgery and just make sure it's correct. And even gives you the incision location. So you can take this to the operating room, turn the paper upside down, and have this as a guide for surgery. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about higher order aberrations. I always like to tell people I have a dog named Zernike, so this is, you know, how much a part of my life this is. And high order aberrations are nothing more than a way of quantifying how the image loses contrast by being spread out by things like spherical aberration, trefoil, and coma. And we use this when we talk to our patients. So this is a normal eye, normal contrast, and this is an eye to say that has had prior refractive surgery. So here's somebody with early generation LASIK. Of course, modern LASIK, does a much better job. But let's just go through the basics of this, and I'll show you how this can be used as a conversation with patients. So here's somebody with 8 diopters of myopic LASIK. And if you look at the center of the corneal vertex, you can see it's a little bit off center. And in fact, there is a real flat area right here that is off center. So if you flatten the central cornea, you increase the spherical aberration, and that gives you a characteristic image halo and glow. And if the ablation is off center, you get coma. Coma is just a form of irregular astigmatism. And where this is so important is if you're thinking about using a multifocal lens. Irregular astigmatism is a killer of multifocal lenses. In fact, even regular astigmatism is. So it can give us a quantification of how much coma they have, and they can also give you an image simulation. And all you have to do is just look at the image simulation. You can see that this patient would be very unhappy with a multifocal lens. We can do the same with a toric lens. We can show them how their vision would be with and without the toric lens in a photopic, mesopic, and scotopic pupil. And then we do this from this screen right here, which shows the topographic map. It shows an image simulation, and it shows the Zernike tree. And you can check or uncheck each of these boxes. So let's say you uncheck all of the second order aberrations. That's astigmatism and defocus. That's what you get with the toric IOL. And then we have these other boxes with the other aberrations, and I'll just show you how those work in just a moment here. So here's somebody with myopic LASIK again, and we can demonstrate what they see like with a photopic pupil, mesopic pupil, scotopic pupil. And if you talk to these patients that had early generation LASIK, they'll tell you that their night vision is not very good. But if we were to do a scleral contact lens, obviously we ameliorate all the aberrations, and it looks so much better. Here's hyperopic LASIK, and there's their daytime vision, their vision around dusk, and their nighttime vision. And this is so important because if you tell somebody before surgery, it's not your fault. If they find out afterwards, they're going to blame you because you might have been the one to cause this. And then you can just show them how they would see with a scleral contact lens. Unfortunately, we really don't have the technology to fix these corneas after hyperopic LASIK. Some topographic driven ablations can be done, like with the Contura, from Alcon, but it has to be, they flatten the cornea, so it has to be an area of elevation. And same thing with radial keratotomy. Where I live, there was a lot of radial keratotomy done. So here's how you're going to see during the day, during dusk, and then at night. And you can demonstrate to the patient that they're still going to have problems with their vision. Now let's talk a little bit about lens tilt. I'm not sure we've really decided on a number for lens tilt. A lot of people are tossing around a number like 6 or 7 degrees preoperatively. But if you're going to put in a multifocal lens or a lens that has a lot of very peculiar characteristics, you're going to want to know about this before surgery. So it just gives us a little bit of a heads up as to how the crystalline lens is oriented before surgery. And you can do this measurement in any one of several meridians. And here's somebody that has had an intraocular lens placed, and they have almost 7 degrees of lens tilt. And this may be in part, why they're having some trouble with this lens. So it's just a little bit more information. Most of the time, when we do these lenses, we have no idea about any lens tilt that may exist ahead of time. Let's talk about the anterior chamber sweep features. Now, we've talked about the cornea and biometry, but we also have very sophisticated OCT, and with that, we can look at the front part of the eye. So again, we have topography up to 12 millimeters. So it's just like a regular topographer. We can view changes and difference maps, like with keratoconus. We track changes over time. We can do all the ectasia display information that we want, like the Balin ambrosia display. And I think Dr. Ambrosia is a Brazilian, if I remember correctly. And we get anterior segment imaging up to 18 millimeters of coverage. So there really aren't any compromises here. So for example, let's look at this. This is the classic, kissing doves, a picture of pellucid marginal degeneration. And a lot of topographers may not give you the entire picture to be able to make this diagnosis with certainty. Okay, these are two patients from my partner, Dr. McKee, and yeah, it looks like pellucid marginal degeneration. Except down at the bottom, of course, you'd see that little band of corneal thinning. But if we look at the posterior cornea, and we can image the posterior cornea just as well as we can the anterior cornea, this isn't pellucid marginal degeneration. It's just keratoconus, and a lot of times the two are mistaken. In fact, pellucid marginal degeneration is really quite rare. You might see, in your whole career, maybe 5 or 10 of these patients. So it's not that common, at least where I live. And then we can do all the difference and trend maps, and you can put in any sorts of maps that you want and view changes over time. And for ectatic disease, this is very important. And you can put in any map that you want on this. We'll just go through this really quickly. But the important thing is to be able to track change and to track change over time. Now, in our part of the United States, we do see a fair amount of ectatic disease. And then with this, we have the Balin ambrosia display, and we can also generate the ABCD maps for tracking changes as well. So I think that the Pennicam does something similar. So we have all the tools for correctly diagnosing keratoconus and also for tracking it. And in our practice, we see a fair number of people that come into us each year that have had the diagnosis of keratoconus for 10 or 15 years, and they've never had keratoconus. They don't have, they may not have ectasia. They just have a funny looking cornea. And it's quite remarkable how normal some keratoconic patients can look on the anterior cornea, and yet they have bona fide ectasia, or how some patients could look like a keratoconus and actually not have it. What they have is just a funny cornea. So it's important to be able to have all the measurements you need to meet the 4 or 5 diagnostic criteria for keratoconus. And then again, we have this anterior segment imaging up to 18 millimeters. And I'll show you what we use it for. We can do these cross sections. And in this particular patient, at the slit lamp, they looked a little bit narrow. And we can actually measure it. And here they're 14 degrees. One of the cutoffs for us is less than 15 degrees. We think about a PI. And at 10 degrees, we're thinking about cataract surgery, because that's the definitive treatment for phacomorphic lens narrowing. So, angle narrowing. So this particular patient is, this is 14 degrees. It's interesting, a little bit asymmetric. It's 21 on the other side, and we can track this. So this is objective information about how narrow the anterior segment is. And a lot of other devices do that. So basically, as I mentioned, this is kind of biometry reimagined, like a Swiss Army knife, to kind of use a funny metaphor here. It has all the instrumentation that we as anterior segment surgeons need. And it replaces 3 separate devices in a relatively small little instrument. It sits up against the wall with the patient facing one direction, you're facing the other. So it doesn't take up a lot of room and have a large footprint. None of the maps that it generates or the information you get is a compromise. Everything is best in class with this device. Everything's very sophisticated. And of course, we can make better decisions if we have the right information. So that's my take on the iStar. We dearly love it. And I think it's really the best biometer that's currently available. And I got a feeling it's going to be even better as time goes on. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay. So do we have any questions?
Well,
I have a question.
Sure.
Just before you start, so we're going to ask some questions here, but any of the attendees that want to ask any questions, just write out the chat and then we'll read it out over here. So Glauco, go ahead.
Fantastic presentation, and it's a great device. We're looking forward. I actually did some testing with the device in the booth in the last meeting. It was very good. But one question that triggers me is why there's still not an epithelial map? Do you think it's gonna be there because you have the raw image, the raw data to be like a complete device to diagnose keratoconus?
I think that's coming. Right now we have software version I13, maybe an I14 or I15. But you're right. You know, the epithelial, that annular change in epithelium is the 5th diagnostic criteria for keratoconus. So yeah, that would be important. And we do have the technology. It's just, you know, how much can you fit into one box all at once? So I think that's coming, and many people have made that comment already.
Dr. Jonathan, acho que você...
Okay. Yes. No, I wasn't being able to unmute. Eduardo Aidan, which is he's an incredible surgeon from Minas. He's asking if it is possible to use a T-cone plastodisc with the iStar as well as with a LensStar.
To use the T-cone that we have on the LensStar?
Yeah.
The LensStar doesn't need the T-cone. It's a 12mm topographer. So the T-cone that was developed for the LensStar was to allow that device to give us some elevation data. And I think you're going to see some new changes coming to the LensStar software that will actually emulate that. But if you have the iStar, you have a world-class topographer, so you're already there. You don't need anything else.
Yeah, in my routine, and this has happened for a long while now, we have to get all these exams and then we kind of spread them over either on the screen or printed on the table in order to help with the decision making. And I was really impressed here with the quality of the images. I was wondering regarding the posterior pole and macula, if that has helped identify any changes at all when compared to other dedicated equipment. And also from the images, and I've been noticing that, I was wondering the role of the lens tilt, really. Then we see these images and how that interfere in calculations or in the decision making.
Sure. All right. Well, it is a Swiss knife, but I don't think it can take the place of a macular OCT. So I don't think it says, or it claims that it can, you know, pick up CME or something like that. It just doesn't. It's mostly for the anterior segment, so it's not gonna give you that kind of screening. And for that, we would have to depend on something like a Cirrus, you know, device. As far as lens tilt goes, I'm not really sure all the information's in on lens tilt. To generate significant astigmatism, you really need a lot of lens tilt, and you need a very powerful lens. But I think if you're going to be putting in multifocal lenses, where the lens has to be perfectly centered and the cornea has to be normal and, you know, the retina has to be perfect. If you have 7 or 8 degrees of lens tilt, that may give you a little bit of pause as to whether or not a diffractive multifocal lens might be a good choice. And Jonathan, I don't know, do you have a number that you use? I mean, 6 or 7 degrees is the number that I've heard from a lot of people, but do you know of anything that's even more definitive?
No, not number wise. I go.
Yeah.
If I see a tilt that's visually significant, you know, that calls some attention towards that, then I tend to not opt for diffractive lens because I think that would be so surprise.
Yeah, and I think you're smart not to do that. But what the number is, what the cutoff is, I don't think anybody really has that information quite yet. Maybe this time next year we'll all know what that number is.
Yes. One more.
I have a final question about the. Sure. What about the posterior data that you have from the Swiss OCT? What do you think how it correlates with the TK that we see in the IOL Master 700? How do you think that we could get there? And
this is a great question. I love this. I was hoping somebody would ask me this. Okay, well, what we have here is a direct measurement. Okay, very different. Okay, it's a direct measurement. And the problem, and just for those who haven't been following this controversy. The problem that we have with the posterior cornea is that the index of refraction of the aqueous and of the posterior cornea are very similar. So it's hard to tell the difference. And being able to image the posterior cornea, not only to get numbers, but to do a topographic map is an amazing technological achievement. So I think these values are probably going to be more reliable and more useful as the calculation technology catches up. I know that Dr. Yo in Singapore on his EVO formula is now using the posterior cornea for the patients with prior refractive surgery, as does Dr. Barrett. And I think the more that we have really good measurement data, the more you're going to see this coming into play. But up until now, we really haven't had good data. So let's just wait and see what time tells us.
We have another question regarding tilt, and it's from Federico Pereira, and he mentions the panacea formula as a formula that allows the input of lens tilt into the calculation. So he's asking if the iStar allows either the acquisition or to use tilt information to improve calculations.
Right now, I don't think any of the formulas on the iStar have that. Panacea is mostly used in Latin America. It's Dr. Flicker, I think is his name. He's in Costa Rica, is that correct? So it's mostly used in the Latin community. It's not popular in the United States or in Europe quite yet. But right now, the formulas don't use lens tilt. But I think the EVO formula is the only formula, at least that we look at occasionally, that has well, actually, EVO doesn't even have lens tilt information. So I think that's still for the future. We don't have that quite yet. Any other questions?
I was impressed with the quality of the anterior OCT. It's from what I saw from the presentation, it rivals other anterior segment OCTs that I've seen that are dedicated to that. But with a larger range. Well, do you think there'll be options to calculate like flap discus or scarring, or bring other measurements besides
you
map?
mean like to add a caliper so that the user could,
yes,
could do
yes,
that?
exactly.
Yeah. I think if the market recommends it and enough people ask for it, that would be a real easy thing to add, wouldn't it? That would just be software. Yeah. So, and you could identify.
Even the epithelial mapping, I think, is just software. You have all the data there. It's just software.
I think so. Yeah, just how much can you pile into one device in the beginning? So the iStar is still relatively new, and I think as more people give suggestions as to what they would like to see, I think it will appear. One of the great things about Hogstrite, and anybody who's ever worked with Hogstrite will tell you this, that they're one of the few companies that actually listen. And if somebody says something and it makes a lot of sense, it will show up. So that's one of the great things about that company.
And one thing that I noticed also is regarding aberrometry and orders of aberration. We can kind of turn on or turn off certain orders.
Yeah.
Do you? And I know that can be done preoperatively, of course, to help us try to evaluate visual quality of especially corneas that have been operated on. Do you see any use for post-operative patients, maybe as a source of complaints, in which we would do this whole biometry, this full eye biometry, with an IOL, and maybe try to locate some sources of insatisfaction, maybe?
You've hit on one of the more common referrals we get. So let's say Mrs. Suarez has a diffractive IOL and she's unhappy with her vision. And we always talk about the 6 C's of unhappy patients, coma, cornea, centration, capsule, CME, and crazy. That's always the sixth.
Great.
That's the
Yeah,
six C's of the
almost
unhappy
always.
multifocal.
Okay,
That
The
comes
last
from
one.
Eric Donenfeld, by the way. He's
okay.
a very funny guy.
Yes.
But when we see somebody who is referred to us because they have a diffractive multifocal lens and they're unhappy, all those other things have already been looked at. Usually the lens is well centered. The cornea looks okay. They don't have basement membrane dystrophy. There's no CME. The capsule is clear. The very first place we go is the aberration profile. And typically what we find is coma. And as I mentioned, coma is just a form of irregular astigmatism, and it's a killer of multifocal lenses. And most people do not screen for coma prior to implanting a multifocal lens. And I think that's ill-advised. And one of the great things about this device is it allows us to look for what may be unacceptable values. Now, the problem is there's no set value for coma. I know that Dr. Hemsa in his group in Alexandria published a study where they drew the line at like 0.3 microns of vertical or horizontal coma. The problem is that the aberrations, it's a dance. Spherical aberration is naturally occurring, and a high value for spherical aberration is remarkably well tolerated. But coma is not naturally occurring except in very small amounts. So you could have like an RMS value of like 0.4, and if most of that was coma, the patient would be unhappy. If most of that was spherical aberration, they might be able to tolerate it. So this is why you need to look at all the aberrations individually, and why image simulation is so important. Because if you have high coma values, you simulate an image, and what you're going to see is image duplication and displacement. Whereas if you have a high RMS value and you see high spherical aberration value, they're just going to get that little bit of a glow. So each one of these aberrations are unique and individual in the way in which they damage contrast. So anyhow, that's kind of a long answer, but if you see somebody that's unhappy with a multifocal lens, look at their aberration profile, and chances are they're going to have elevated coma values. And if you look at their image simulation and you show it to them, you're going to be a hero. In our diagnostic room, we have this huge LED display. It's like 3 or 4 feet across. And we show the patient their image simulation. And usually what they say is, yes, that's exactly what I see. The other doctor wouldn't listen to me. Thank you. I'm going to name a grandchild after you. because not only have you made the diagnosis, but you validated their complaints. So the Zernike tree is so important, especially for people that are having problems after surgery. I know that's a long answer, but that's kind of how we do it.
No, it's perfect. I think I'm looking forward to using this.
Yeah. And get a big LED display and put it in the room and show the patient, and they just love that. I mean, it's really worthwhile.
Yeah, I think patient education is going to improve a lot with these solutions, both for large screens and maybe even I don't know how the connectivity is to cell phones, but that might help exporting and improving mobility and exchanging cases and everything. I'm looking forward to that too.
There's a lot of ways to do this. The important thing is that we as doctors actually have to talk to the patients.
Yes.
Maybe in Brazil you do a better job than we do in the United States. Usually in the United States, we're too important to talk to the patients.
No, we have they'll talk to us for sure.
Yes.
Unless something happens with all the generic, I have a problem saying the GPT, right? The generative programming language. Yeah, the chat GPT. So, I mean, who knows how that will go. Okay, Glauco, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
So let's just share my screen.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Português.
Yeah, and do this in Portuguese, not English.
Let's see, everybody is okay? Todos estão vendo minha tela? Ok.
Perfeito, Dr. Glauco.
Uma boa noite a todos. É um prazer aí, uma honra estar apresentando logo após a Dr. Warren Hill. Eu não tenho nenhum interesse relacionado diretamente a esse assunto, apesar do interesse não financeiro, né, de trabalhar já com equipamento há mais de 13 anos, né, com uma satisfação bastante grande, né, do uso do Lenstar, né, e da qualidade da biometria. Então, eu quis trazer alguns pontos de atenção em relação à biometria, né? O ponto principal aqui é em relação à qualidade do exame, né, tanto com relação à captura quanto à qualidade do equipamento que você está utilizando na biometria, o entendimento dessas fórmulas, né, os pontos onde a gente pode estar errando em cada caso, também são bem importantes para o cirurgião, né, completo que queira estar dando o melhor para o seu paciente, e casos especiais, né, onde que a gente deve olhar, né? Em cada cenário a gente deve buscar às vezes algum tipo de erro, onde que a gente tem que buscar aquele ponto mais sensível daquele caso. Então, realmente o Lenstar é um equipamento bastante amigável, né, no sentido de que ele já vai te dar vários alertas de, poxa, essa captura não está legal, essa qualidade não está legal, mas claro que, né, com a tecnologia que nós temos do Lenstar, é interessante você agregar, né, por exemplo, um anel de plácido, né, que você pode ter no Ticon para você avaliar essa superfície ocular, né, você tem que ter a melhor ceratometria, mais de uma ceratometria bastante importante, mas claro que realmente a ceratometria do Lenstar é a que eu uso, por exemplo, para o cálculo de lente tórica, tanto de magnitude quanto de eixo. Né, biometria ótica é realmente, né, é o rei, é o padrão ouro que nós temos hoje. A gente sabe que ainda precisa, cada vez menos, mas ainda precisamos, né, da imersão em alguns casos. A gente espera aí com as próximas atualizações ainda menos. E realmente a superfície ocular eu acho que é chave, né, na biometria bem feita. Eu trazer até, compartilhar um exame que um colega trouxe, a gente acaba sempre discutindo bastante casos, e me mostrou esse caso, poxa, que lente eu escolho, né? Então, trazendo uma biometria que num olho estava dando uma lente 29,5, na outra 21, os AXLs de um olho estava 24 e o outro 21. Quando a gente viu os casos e olhava o dado do Pentacan, realmente tudo irregular, e quando ia na imersão, né, o AXL era igual entre os dois olhos, né? Então você vê que realmente a qualidade do exame aqui, né, não era confiável, e você não tinha como responder a algo com base nesses exames, você teria que melhorar muito a superfície para capturar. Então aqui no caso até né, a captura do AXL foi prejudicada de alguma forma, né, com essa captura com problema de superfície ocular. Então, realmente, o Lenstar então, usa essa tecnologia de refletometria de coerência ótica. Isso, assim, a gente acaba tendo bastante trabalho mostrando que eles são intercambiáveis entre as diferentes tecnologias de biometria ótica. E eu acho que a chave aqui que a gente tem no Lenstar é realmente a ceratometria, né? Esses 32 pontos, com dois anéis de 1,65 e 2,3, realmente trazem uma precisão bastante grande em relação à magnitude e eixo. E, claro, a gente sempre combina com um dado de plácido, até para você entender se aquele astigmatismo é regular, irregular, mas quando você tem o astigmatismo regular, né, o cálculo e a direção da lente tórica realmente são calculados de maneira bastante previsível com o equipamento. A espessura de cristalino é outro dado, já que a gente tem aparelhos, né, que estão nessa faixa similar ou concorrentes diretos com o Lenstar, que acabam não tendo o cálculo de espessura de cristalina, e que é um dado bastante relevante para as fórmulas mais avançadas. Então, você com certeza está ficando um passo atrás em termos de cálculo e não ter à disposição, né, a espessura do cristalino. Profundidade de câmara, né, profundidade de câmara anterior, que seria o AD, que depende de calcular também a paquimetria da córnea. Também alguns equipamentos podem não fornecer. No caso aqui, a fórmula do Dr. Hill incluída diretamente no aparelho, além de outras, né, como a própria Barrett. E as versões mais novas do Lenstar, a gente tem esse sistema APS, que é um sistema que acaba facilitando e agilizando as medidas. A gente acaba, né, nas primeiras versões, que é a minha do Lenstar, que não tem o APS, a gente tem uma captura um pouco mais lenta das medidas, e quando a gente usa esse sistema, realmente a gente tem uma agilidade nessa captura, né, fazendo, né, aqui citando exemplos que cada uma, né, para você tomar as 5 medidas, no caso de ceratometria, ele vai fazer 4 capturas de cada uma dessas medidas, no total você vai ter 20 dados de ceratometria, lembrando naqueles, cada uma delas vão ter esses 32 pontos, né? Em relação da medida dos dados intraoculares, a gente acaba tendo cada medida fazendo 16 capturas, né? No total são 80 medidas que vão estar gerando essas 5 medidas que o aparelho vai estar te mostrando. Então, a gente vai ter, né, um dado realmente com desvio padrão bastante satisfatório. Aqui, né, o panorama de todos os dados que a gente tem, né? Temos a opção, né, de já ter no equipamento a topografia, que pode te ajudar também em relação a já fazer o cálculo da tórica, já com o desenho da tórica, com a impressão que te facilita. Claro que também você pode utilizar um topógrafo associado, que a gente sempre recomenda ter um anel de plástico, uma topografia, né, para não fazer a catarata diretamente só com a ceratometria. Também em relação a óleos especiais, né, você pode até trocar essa condição do olho depois da medida. Também facilita aí, né, o cálculo de óleos de silicone, com óleo de silicone, tudo acaba sendo bastante preciso, muito mais preciso do que por imersão, por exemplo. Aqui trazendo alguns dados, só não tem muito tempo, né? Estou até escapando um pouquinho do tempo, mas mostrando que a gente tem medidas bastante similares ao aparelho OPD Scan 3, que é também um aparelho que, em termos de dados de segmento anterior, né, de ceratometria e tudo, é um dos aparelhos padrão ouro mais utilizados, e o Lenstar realmente nessas medidas também traz dados que podem ser utilizados de maneira intercambiável. Aqui trazendo também um outro dado em comparação com o IOL 500, o 700 e o Lenstar, mostrando que o Lenstar e o IOL 700 tiveram uma taxa de aquisição de imagens maior do que do 500, ou seja, nesse dataset aqui, tiveram, se não me engano, acho que foram 15 ou 19 olhos que não conseguiram ser medidos com o 500, somente cerca de 5 olhos com o Lenstar e 3 olhos com o IOL Master 700, então mesmo estando numa faixa diferente até de valores do IOL Master 700, ele acabou conseguindo medir mais cataratas mais densas do que o próprio IOL 500. Né? Então, realmente é um aparelho que, de custo-benefício, parece ser bastante interessante. Trazendo em relação às fórmulas, então, realmente a gente tem que trabalhar, né, com as fórmulas de última geração, e temos fórmulas, né, do próprio Bard, do Dr. Hill, né, a Pearl, que dão resultados excelentes para olhos normais. Né, saber que olhos normais em que nós temos aí um 5K de 43, né, um ACD ali de 3 e pouquinho, tá, né, com uma espessura de córnea normal, isso a gente sempre coloca, né, com a esfericidade normal, isso é né, em inglês um piece of cake para a gente calcular a biometria, né, então qualquer fórmula vai dar um serviço legal. Aqui em português a gente fala, né, um filé, esse é o caso filé, que é tranquilo da gente resolver. Então, nos olhos normais, qualquer fórmula vai bem, mas quando a gente começa a chegar com dados de ceratometrias extremas, olho que já operou, né, miopia muito alta e principalmente hipermétrope, ou dados de ACD extremos ou não compatíveis com aquele AXL, né, então um ACD muito pequeno num olho muito grande, né, tudo isso você vai ter problemas, e aí sim vai entrar, né, claro, as fórmulas mais avançadas, mas também a personalização da tua decisão. Então, eu quis trazer um caso aqui para finalizar. É um paciente de 37 anos que já tinha feito um LASIK 10 anos antes, estimado em -11, descolou a retina, fez daí a vitré, daí desenvolveu depois uma catarata subcapsular posterior, estava conta-dedos, né, e paciente bastante exigente até. A gente avaliou o padrão de aberrações dela, inclusive não tinha muito como, mas bastante aberração esférica, até como o professor Rio comentou. E a gente calculou, utilizando os casos do Galilei, que usa uma ceratometria de diâmetro um pouco maior, né, de 3 milímetros, com os cases do Lenstar, que acaba utilizando uma zona óptica menor, e a gente tinha uma diferença de mais de uma dioptria na lente só por conta desse K, né? Utilizando todos os outros dados iguais, só a ceratometria entre um equipamento e outro já dava essa diferença. A gente acabou utilizando, então, uma lente 21,5, né, nessa paciente, e até uma lente de foco estendido que a gente utilizou. O limite de retina era desse mesmo, de 20/25 parcial para 20/30, por conta do descolamento de retina, e realmente acertamos na mosca com essa ceratometria, né, de menor. E quando a gente olha e compara, não é todo o LASIK que é igual, né? Então, se eu pego esse olho, que é a esquerda aqui, que é dessa paciente, que é um LASIK mais antigo, a gente vê que a diferença entre a região central e a região paracentral, quando estiver indo para a periferia, é bastante grande. A gente tem na região central ali 34, 35, e a gente vai para 38, logo na margem pupilar. Quando a gente pega um LASIK mais recente, né, eu vou ter praticamente uma córnea muito mais homogênea. Então, nesse caso à direita, né, uma ceratometria de zona óptica maior vai dar um resultado muito bom, assim como a região mais central, mas quando eu pego um caso de LASIK mais antigo, eu preciso de casos de zonas ópticas menores. Aqui a gente vai ter um resultado, né, superior. Bem, eu agradeço dos 10 minutos e fico sempre à disposição aí de todos também. Deixa eu só
A foto do Atlético não é boa não, hein, doutor Glauco?
Tá mais ou menos agora.
Fantástico, fantástico.
Perfeito.
Caso excelente aqui, Glauco. A gente se encontra, sempre tem uns casos diferentes aí, né? O que eu gosto muito no Lenstar, né? A gente vai observar bem o comportamento do iStar. Eu vou no checklist, né? O que a gente recebe. Mas tem duas questões ali. E o checklist, a gente vê, são vários itens que vemos, né? Intimida um pouco olhar isso, mas como qualquer padrão, né? Qualquer padronização, qualquer standard que nós seguimos em processos, ele acaba se automatizando. Então, isso ocorreu comigo ao usar, mas ocorreu também com todos os funcionários que fazem a utilização que fazem a biometria. E ao padronizar ou internalizar isso, automaticamente você melhora a qualidade do teu exame, melhora a confiança no resultado do seu exame. É interessante que esse padrão saia do lançar para outros aparelhos também, porque
Sim.
esse checklist serve para qualquer biometria. Então, isso acaba sendo super importante nos casos normais, mas caso normal acaba dando resultado. Mas o que importa são os casos difíceis, né? A porcentagem cada vez menor de pacientes que fogem, né, do nosso resultado, mas que a gente precisa focar neles, né? Até chegar aos 100%. E aí acho que se aplica também para esses casos diferentes, pós-refrativa, né? Então, isso é bem interessante.
Um dado que é bem importante é realmente olhar, né, os anéis de plástico, olhar a superfície ocular, né? Acho que esses são bem relevantes até em ceratotomia radial. É muito comum você ter, às vezes, uma incisão aberta e muito aberrado, e às vezes o padrão normal de um pentacam, por exemplo, não te mostra isso, né? Você olhar só para a ceratometria. Então, né, entender bem o caso e olhar com detalhe. Claro, o checklist te ajuda a ver os padrões e fora da normalidade.
E aí acaba sendo uma ferramenta clínica, de propedêutica mesmo, de avaliação. Tão importante para mim quanto a lâmpada de fenda também. É mais do que os números. Aí os números são uma consequência desta avaliação. Então, para mim, esse é um dos méritos.
Magnífico, magnífico. Doutor Jonathan, doutor Glauco, realmente é encantador. Eu falo que quando eu vejo o doutor Glauco falando de um Lenstar, eu tenho vontade de comprar um para mim. Falar, vou colocar lá na minha sala. Então, magnífico que é. E o doutor Jonathan, com essa vasta experiência que tem, né? Poucos casos, né, doutor Jonathan? Milhares e milhares de biometria. E Dr. Hill is very, very spectacular. It's fantastic presentation. Is very, very good. Nossa proposta era 1 hora. Nós estamos faltando 2 minutos. E como bom inglês, né? Vamos ver se a gente consegue cumprir esse requisito. E aqui, em nome da ADAPT, primariamente, eu quero agradecer imensamente ao Dr. Glauco, ao Dr. Jonathan, ao Dr. Hill, parabenizar a Laís e todo o trabalho que fez, a minha equipe em divulgar. Muito obrigado. E a palavra são dos senhores agora. Muito obrigado. Dr. Glauco?
I think there is a question to Dr. Hill here, that he saw that the keratometry dots were interpolated now, as well as we discussed it before. What about this definition with iStar? I think, I think you presented that in the keratometry dots, there is some differences in the iStar regarding the Lenstar. Can you just explain a little bit better that?
Yeah, well, the Lenstar has the same number of LEDs. It's just that each of the 2 rings have the LEDs in the same meridian. Whereas with the iStar, they're interdigitated. So instead of being lined up like this with the Lenstar, they're like this. And so it gives us more density of measurement, because we're not measuring 100% of the area. So if we offset them a little bit, we have more information about the magnitude and the orientation of the astigmatism. So we just get a little bit more accuracy. So that was the thinking behind that. Yeah.
Okay, this was wonderful presentation.
It's so good to see all of you. Yeah.
Great to see everybody again here. I'm really looking forward to this next step in biometry. One-stop shop for everything.
Pretty much.
Real
and by the way, I'll be at your 2024 meeting. So
that's fantastic.
perfect.
I'll be traveling to Brazil, and I'm going to have to brush up on my Portuguese, huh?
Yes, for sure. Rio de Janeiro, it's going to be beautiful. We have the conference this year is enormous. It's great to have all the here. And two of our great guests. So thank you very much for this.
Okay, good to see you.
Magnet, Lais, thank you so much for hosting this webinar. This is great.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good to see everybody, and perhaps I'll see you in Rio de Janeiro next year.
For sure, all of us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, have a great evening. Good night.
Bye-bye, everybody. Good night. Bye-bye.